Hey guys, welcome back to Stop the Shunning. My name is Bethany, in case you're tuning in for the first time. Today I'm talking with Sherry. Sherry is a former Jehovah's Witness. She's been shunned for most of her life, but she went on to build a life outside of the organization after she left the Jehovah's Witnesses. She's a retired educator, was a teacher for over 30 years, and she was doing well for herself until recently events unfolded with her devout Jehovah's Witness family that has sort of dredged up concerns. They've re-entered her life, and it's sort of dredged up concerns and questions that she has, that maybe, possibly, other former Jehovah's Witnesses are also dealing with, and so she wanted to share her story and share this with everybody. So thanks for coming on the channel today, Sherry, and connecting.
Thank you so much, Bethany. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope that whatever I share today will help ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who may be lured back into the fold by a very strategic move on the part of the governing body. So thank you for letting me come on. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate you reaching out and connecting, and I think you bring up some good points and some good questions. So with that said, let's go ahead and get right into it. Can you tell us a little bit about your background with the witnesses?
Sure. I was 9 years old. Don't worry, I'm not gonna belabor this, but I was 9 when a brother came to the door and was always coming to talk to my mother. And my mother was a very lonely, kind of mentally disturbed, depressed person. And so she would welcome these long, drawn out conversations with this Jehovah's Witness man. He came every other day. She was the perfect householder because she'd stand there and talk to him. And then this person decided that he would send an elder and his wife and his daughter, who was my age, and start a Bible study. And so that is, my parents went in hook, line, and sinker. But I was a willing participant even at the age of 9. And I was a reader, an avid reader, and I was reading all of the literature and just soaking it up. I was only 9, so it was easy to influence me, I think. So I was reading all this literature and I really enjoyed it. And so I fell in line and I was a very good witness. As a teenager, I was really good at the door. Everybody wanted to have me as a partner because, oh, Sherry's so good at the door. She's got the gift of gab, etc. And I was good at giving the talks, the Tuesday ministry school, and I was okay with going to the meetings 3 times a week and studying Watchtower and making sure I stayed current with the readings and the texts. Nobody can say that they've read the Bible cover to cover more than me, but I really loved it. But that shifted when I had a rude awakening, and that rude awakening was when I was old enough to realize that the organization and the elders in my own congregation were misogynist. Now, I didn't know that word back then, but I knew what it was. And so I saw all the misogyny and I was feeling a little bit uncomfortable because now I was much older. I was like 16 going on 17, right? And when my parents were disfellowshipped, they were disfellowshipped for having extramarital affairs. But my dad was quickly reinstated because apparently my father expressed enough remorse and my mother was not expressing, in their view, enough remorse. So the shunning happened to my mother under my watch. I had to watch the cruelty that my mother's friends inflicted upon her. And then that resulted in the end, my mother was a victim of the congregation, of the organization, when she committed suicide. And that was a turning point. That was a real turning point for me. And my father was still very much entrenched and was determined to keep me entrenched, but I was already drifting away. Mentally, emotionally, I was not having it. And I think my father could see, oh, my daughter's getting so willful. She's not as devout. She doesn't want to go out in service, etc. And when my father moved away, he didn't take me with him. He moved to Indiana from California, and I was only 18, and he wanted me to go. I mean, he didn't want me to go, I'm sorry. And I was left alone. So my disfellowshipping was a result of me creating my own family. So I decided that, well, I don't have a family. He took my little brother away. My mother's dead. My daddy is gone. So, okay, I'll take life in my own hands. And I created my own family for which I was disfellowshipped. The interesting
Sorry,
thing,
I'm I'm s I'm sorry about your mother and
thank you.
yeah, and, the way she was treated and what you went
Yeah,
through.
but that was a turning point for me. I won't let my mother's death be in vain. I'd like to look at it as that was kind of a catalyst to me being free, unlocking the shackles, like, okay, now your eyes are open and now you can get woke because of this. So my choice at that point was I have my son, I'm happy, I'm in college. I'm moving forward. I'm working for myself now. I'm taking ownership of my faith. And I believe in God. And I will continue to worship God the way that I know He wants me to worship Him. I don't need, it's like the Catholic Church. I don't need the priest in order to get absolution. I don't need the elders to serve God. I don't even need the literature. I have a Bible. I have a Bible, which I replaced with the King James version, by the way, because the New World Translation is just it's so wrong. So I opened up my own Bible and I worshiped God that way. And that was so it was kind of the beginning of my life, I'd say. So I went to law school, I got a master's degree, I fell into teaching because I loved it so much, and I had another baby. I led a pretty good life. And yes, my father shunned me, and that shunning was, particularly traumatic for me because I didn't care about the congregation. That didn't matter. My Achilles heel was my dad. That was the Achilles heel. I wanted my dad's love. I wanted my dad's protection. I wanted approval. I wanted a grandfather for my sons. That's what I wanted. Didn't get any of that. And I was treated abominably by my father and his wife. I didn't care about the congregation. I had cut them off. It was my dad. And the way I was treated by the 2 of them, my stepmother as well as my father, was just abominable, and it was hurtful, and I carried that with me, but I refused to be defined by it, so I continued to just work toward what I wanted to do, and I stayed educated, and I did things that made my life happy and what I would do for my boys, right? Um, but this all sounds nice, like, "Oh, she's fine." Well, yeah, and I am, except that, like I said, my Achilles heel is my daddy, and my dad, I'm 63, my dad's 20 years older, right? So my dad started getting sick, and when daddy got super sick, then I was called to go fly out there to be by his bedside because he was dying. And I had completely prepared for what I was in for when I got there. I had an armor on mentally and psychologically and emotionally that nobody's going to be able to penetrate me and hurt me. I'm just going for my dad, and that's that. Well, it didn't turn out that way. But when I got there, it wasn't what I expected. See, I'm used to being shunned. We all are. I can handle that. I've learned to navigate that. I don't have a problem with that. I know what to do, right? But when I got there, I was warmly embraced by my stepmother, who hasn't spoken to me in 44 years. And she warmly embraced me at the skilled nursing facility, put my face in her hands, stared me in the eye, tears running down her face. Forgive me for abandoning you and that baby. that baby is 43 years old now. She said, "I regret, and I will live to regret it to the day I die,
Huh.
that I abandoned you and shunned you." I couldn't believe it. And I
Shocking. That's
Yeah,
shocking. Yeah.
and but, I'm a good, gracious person, and I could tell she was sincere. She was sincere, so I hugged her back. Therein lies the catch here. See, my family's my Achilles heel, not the brothers and sisters, just my
Sure.
family. So I warmed up to that, and then when my father saw me, he cried, and we had wonderful moments together where I lay on the bed with him and held him, and he apologized for everything. He didn't know my kids, let alone my grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. He apologized for things like that. So it was very heartwarming. But when the elders showed up, and they were trying to be warm with me.
Oh, I'm
Oh, no, no,
sorry.
no. No, my stepmother can get away with it. Yeah, my stepmother could get away with it, but one of the elders actually said, "Oh, has a daughter?" That just bespeaks where we're at here, is that they didn't even know my dad had a daughter. And I looked at that elder and I said, "Yeah, has a daughter." And I rolled my eyes, and he says, "Oh, I didn't mean it." I go, "Sure." And then he says, "Well, I guess I should be going now." And I said, "Thank you for coming. Means a lot." And then there were sisters that came to my dad's bedside, and they equally tried to befriend me, asking questions. And again, I was just very businesslike, very terse, I was polite, but they could also tell that I had a wall and I wasn't falling for it.
It's incredibly what the audience needs to understand is it's incredibly disingenuous.
Oh, yeah.
This is I mean, they shunned you. At least there was some self-awareness on the part of your father and your stepmother. But like you said, you don't have any warm fuzzies for the congregation. This is Jehovah's Witness culture in a nutshell, and this happens to a lot of people who are, reconnecting or trying to reconcile with loved ones who are in a bad way, and then it's like the congregation comes up in your business and I've seen it happen in my own life and other people's stories, so I'm just in my head as you're telling me this, I'm just like, "Yeah, this tracks." So what happened then? So
Well,
they just kind of
they would sit there and they stared at me a lot. And I understood why they were staring, because they didn't know I had a daughter. And so they were staring at me a lot, and I know why. They were probably trying to find the resemblance, like, "Oh, wow, we didn't know she existed," and I think they were looking at me, trying to see how much does she look like brother, right? So, I was kind of an object of mystery and wonder to them, and they wanted so badly to, uh, to talk to me, and I was not going to do that. I was not going to do that, and some of them eventually realized, "Okay, she's cold. We're not even gonna try." And I was like, "Cool. That's the way it should be. Let's
I
let's not."
they're not part of it. They're not part of your world and your life, and this is between you and your father. It's a very, tender personal moment, and then to have the congregation, they're always looking for information and trying to piece things together. It's like I said, it's very disingenuous.
Well, when we had the funeral, I flew back to Arizona, but then I had to fly back for the funeral, and my stepmother said, "This is gonna be a tricky thing for you going to the Kingdom Hall. You haven't been in the Kingdom Hall in 4 decades." I said, "It's okay." I said, "I'm just gonna sit there, and I'm just going to sit there and grieve like I'm supposed to, and that's what I'm going to do." But it didn't work out that way. They did not leave me alone. They swarmed around me. I couldn't believe how many witnesses came over to me, touching me, stroking my hair, kissing my face, like I was the prodigal son in the book of Matthew. And I couldn't, it was hard for me to accept that, especially while I'm grieving.
Well, I mean, it's such a stark contrast to what your reality has been
Exactly.
for over 40 years, and then all of a sudden, all the love bombing, we've all heard that word, to suddenly have all that love
Yeah.
bombing. So, okay, so what happened?
Well, there was a video montage, of,
Yeah.
all these pictures of my father. And there were pictures of my dad when he was young. He was a very handsome and full-blooded Italian. He looked like a godfather. He was a very striking gentleman. Even to his last breath, he was striking. But all of those photos with my brother, with my stepmother, not a single photo of me and my father. Well, because my dad left me when I was 18. So there are no photos. There wasn't a single photo of on that display in the Kingdom Hall of myself and my dad. And that kind of hit me while I'm sitting there looking at it. And then when the overseer gave the talk, because you're not allowed to give part of it. You can't say anything. You don't give a eulogy. It doesn't work like that. They're in control. You be quiet.
It's a marketing campaign for the organization. Funerals, it's very disrespectful. Go ahead. Good. No.
So he let me write a couple of stories about my father, and he read them verbatim, and I appreciated that. He said wonderful things about my father, and I appreciated that. But then he upset me, but I knew that that was going to happen, where he said, "Is there any other human being you know of who could have outserved than was the ideal Jehovah Witness because he sacrificed everything for Jehovah?" And I thought to myself, yeah, he did. He went down with that ship. And that annoyed me and hurt me that he said, we should all be like brother because he did everything for Jehovah. Now I knew he was going to say those things because that's part of their campaign, right? Well, then the overseer walks me to the car and he says, "Sherry, I just want you to know that your father struggled and agonized every single day over his choice between you and Jehovah, but he was a dedicated servant of God." He poked the bear. So I looked at him. I didn't get angry, but I looked at him and I said, "My dad may have made these choices, but not without your help, because Jehovah's Witnesses do nothing without the blessing and the go ahead from the elders." And my brother told me that my dad had wanted so badly to reconnect with me, but that he messed it up by calling the elders and asking, "Can I see my daughter?" And they said no. They said,
The amount of overreach is
right.
insanely inappropriate and disgusting. They need to stay out of people's lives and families.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I would have been
I
furious.
was, Beth. I was really furious, but I also was
How da I'm sorry. Sorry, Sherry. How No, 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 I was just like, "How dare you at my father's funeral?" They're
Right.
so insufferable. They're so insufferable. I'm sorry, that hits me. That
Yeah.
hits that at your father's funeral, they did
Well,
that.
because
Sorry.
it's happening to us all, Beth. Those of us who are ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who have parents that are gonna go down with that sinking ship, we have to stand by and watch as they go down and drown in that dogma, in those doctrines, and there's nothing that we can do because they are so beholden to everything that the governing body tells them. When my father, had made plans with me one year to meet me, I was so excited. I was so excited. I was gonna do a road trip, and I love my daddy so much, so I packed up the car, and I drove all the way from Monterey, California, all the way up to Seattle to visit my dad. Get all the way there, and my brother says, "Sherry, you're not gonna like this." I said, "What?" He says, "Daddy has something for you." I said, "What?" And he says, "On the table." It's a watchtower of why he couldn't see me. I drove all the way. That memory alone makes me wanna tear up because I could not believe that my father gifted me a watchtower. He couldn't even call and say, well, he never had my phone number, but he couldn't say, "Sherry, I talked to an elder and I can't do this." So I told my brother, I said, "Get him on the phone." He goes,
Yeah.
"Sherry, I'm not gonna do that." I said, "Get daddy on the phone." He says, "He's not gonna talk to you." I said, "I know, you're gonna talk to him with me listening and ask him why I got a watchtower." And so he'd called my dad, and my dad said, "Sherry, I love Jehovah more than you." That's all I needed to hear.
Um, 1, I'm sorry. 2, I've said this on my channel ad nauseum because sometimes people will say, and I know they mean well, but, like, they're also not it's, like, unsolicited advice, and I know, they're not going through the same thing, or maybe they are and they're just, trying to push their unsolicited advice, but it's, "Oh, your parents love you," or they do love you, they're suffering. They love the organization and their vindication, and it is what it is. They love that more. I'm not saying they don't love me or they don't love you or, they don't love their children,
Mm.
but they love they think it's Jehovah.
Right,
We can't take that from them. That is their
right.
belief. They believe
That's
they're doing it for Jehovah.
no, I
But
get
they
that.
love yeah, they it's not that they don't love their child, but they love this thing more than they love their
More than
children.
well, and I was told at the funeral by all of these swarms of brothers and sisters who
But
were,
yeah, we gotta talk about that more. Sorry.
yeah, but they were telling me this thing. They said, "Oh, your father mentioned you all the time." I said, "Did he?" And they said, "Oh, yeah, your dad really loved you." I said, "Interesting. How do you know that?" And then they said, "Well, because he said so." I said, "He told you?" "Yeah, he told me he loved you." I said,
Oh, that's
"He never
nice.
told." I said, "He never told me," and I left them dumbfounded because I don't think they expected that I was going to really stand in my truth, not their truth, and stand in my power. Like, you are not going to, gaslight me here at all
Twist
by
this
telling me,
around. No.
flipping that script like, "Well, your dad really, really loved you." I said, "Oh, you know this how?" "He told me." "Oh, never told me."
And they'll always put the onus on you to make things right. That's
Right, because
that's
I was
yeah.
yes. I was told by a sister who was sitting next to me. She wouldn't leave she was sitting next to me and she was hugging me and she was holding me. I don't wanna be cradled, you're a stranger, and I'm old, but she wanted to cradle me, and I just backed off a little bit, and, then she got up and left, and then I thought, "Okay, she's done." Well, then she came back around after the funeral and she sat next to me again because I didn't get up. I stayed seated. I wasn't gonna mingle with anybody, and she said, "This is the impetus now, Sherry, for you to come back to the truth." And I was like, "Well, you should not have said that to me because now you're gonna get an earful." And, I told her that, this does not qualify for any let me see, how did I say that? I can't remember exactly what I said, but I was talking about all of the damage that has been done. I said, "And you embracing me, I can't I can't cope with this love that you're giving me." I said, "I'm used to being shunned, so this is something that I don't trust." And I told her, she says, "You have too much anger you're holding on to." I said, "I'm the problem.
It's
I'm
you.
the problem. It's me.
Yeah.
All I have to do is accept them."
Yeah.
She says, "Can't you accept, Sherry, that Jehovah is softening his people?" I said, "So what that means then is that he's softening you. Does that mean therefore that you were all callous and hard? So where was Jehovah in that?" And she says, "You're just holding on to too much anger."
It's crazy making.
It
It's
is.
cr it's crazy making, Sherry. It's gaslighting, it's emotional manipulation, and I am so glad that you had the, wherewithal or the fortitude to understand the difference, and even if it was, like, on some level, like, "Oh, this is nice, they're not shunning me and treating me like shit," excuse me, you were sharp enough and on your toes enough to be like, "Oh, no, 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 something's wrong here." And to stand up for yourself. That's a very difficult situation. to be
And
in after 40 years.
yeah, and I'm not even gonna lie, you hit the nail on the head when you said it must have felt a little bit nice. I'm not going to lie.
We're human.
Yes, I'm human, and getting that kind of attention did feel nice, but I also had the presence of mind to know that this is bait. This is something that they're doing because I have been researching the organization, and I've learned that because of that Norway decision, that they kind of pivoted a little bit with regard to the shunning, and now they can talk to you about spiritual things. Indeed, after my father died, I went back to Seattle, and my stepmother allowed me to come in the house of my father that I had been shunned to. I was not allowed to go into that house for 44 years. I hadn't walked in my dad's house in 44 years. You may be able to relate to that because I know your story. Yeah, so imagine after all that time and suddenly you get to walk into this, felt like walking into a palace, to be honest with you. And I didn't recognize the place because it had been, my baby was only a year old and he's 43, gonna be 44 now. So that's how long it was. But when we sat down, she proceeded to turn the TV on for me to watch JW.org and the new Jesus, Australian Jesus videos. And she proceeded to
I'm
take
not
out
laughing
this.
because this is funny. I'm sorry for the reaction, but just the Australian Jesus part took me
Yes.
out. Sorry.
Yeah, well, it flipped me out because, I said, "He has an Australian accent, I can't take this seriously, there's no credibility here." She says, "Well, you were raised in the truth, and you should know," and she just kinda preached a little bit, and then she took out the Bible, and her Bible is on her phone, and I said, "Linda, where's your real Bible?" She says, "Oh, we don't use those anymore." I said, "Well, I can't do that." I said, I'm a baby boomer too, and but I can't do that." I said, "I need a real Bible." But she was showing me scriptures, and she wanted to have a Bible study. This is unheard of. So this is the strategy now, is that
That's what
it didn't work. Shunning you didn't work. Shunning people didn't get us anywhere. So what do we got to do to get these people back and improve our reputation in the community, the global community? Well, we will be nice to them and we will welcome them as if they're prodigal kids.
too late.
It is too late. Well, the interesting thing is, I was respectful to my stepmother. She treated my father like gold. I mean, she loved my dad. That was the love of her life, and I have to give props to that. But I did tell her, I said, I said, "I'm not used to this." I said, "I appreciate it. I know you're coming from a good place, and I believe you that you love me. I believe you. I totally believe you." I said, "But I can't wrap my mind around the sudden shift when and 43 years of all of that time lost with my father. And now suddenly, because the organization tells you it's okay, now
That's
I
really what
can,
it all boils down to.
the shunning didn't work. I said, obviously, it never worked on me. And she says, "Well, we always thought, Sherry, that if we made you miss us enough, that you would come back." And you know what I said to her? I said, "How'd that work out for y'all? Because my dad's dead. How'd that work?" And she says, "Well, that's why the organization is softening." I said, "Softening now, but how do you unring those bells? How do you undo the trauma and the damage and the abandonment issues that most ex-Jehovah's Witnesses have to go to therapy for?" I didn't go to therapy. I am my therapy. That I am my own therapy. I stood up for myself, which is why my father didn't really like me, because I wasn't going to toe the line. My father was a soldier right down to the end. I am not a soldier. I don't do as I'm told. I'm a warrior. There's a difference.
You couldn't be controlled and corralled and
No.
be force fed.
I told her
Uh-huh.
when we were having this conversation, I will always bow down before God,
Mhm.
but it'll be a cold day before I ever bow down to the governing body or a body of men. And she couldn't say anything to that. She just said,
She
"I'm
knows.
sorry that all this happened to you." And I said, "It's okay." I said, "There's nothing to forgive." I said, "Because the trajectory that this put my life on, look where it ended me, where I ended up. Look what happened. You know, you guys set me on a trajectory, another path that I was meant to embark upon." I came back from the funeral and spreading my dad's ashes and thinking about, wow, that was a whirlwind turn of events that I never anticipated, just came out of left field. I mean, I knew the organization had softened since the Norway decision, but at the same time, I just braced myself for the worst of it, and that didn't happen. So when I came home, I thought, they could have roped me in. They could have really manipulated me. They could have played mind games and I could have fallen for it. And I thought to myself, if that's their new tactic, I'm not the only person
Oh, no,
that
no,
they're
no.
going to try that on. And they're going to try that on so many ex Jehovah's Witnesses
They have
who
to.
yeah, because they need to bring them back in, and it could work on some people who maybe haven't worked through their trauma and maybe haven't, really stood in their own power and felt like, yeah, I can live without the organization. And yeah, if I have to live without my family, then there it is. But some people are going to be, oh, this is what I've been waiting for. Oh, and
Right.
then they'll be baited back in.
It's this false sense of closure.
Yes.
Like, oh, everything's wrapped up with a pretty bow, and then all of a sudden, before they know it, they're sucked back into this this cycle of manipulation. Even though the family's not thinking of it that way, they're just indoctrinated. But whatever whatever the organization says or the GB says, they'll be like, "Oh, now I can reach out to my disfellowshipped son or daughter." It's insane. And then, yeah, you're right. They could, if somebody doesn't feel like they have solid footing and haven't worked through, like you said, worked through their
Yeah.
stuff and feel confident with themselves, they could be emotionally, 'cause it's your
You
family, you love your parents or you love your brother, sister, or whatever, you could be emotionally roped back into that situation and then all of a sudden have this whiplash, of like, "Whoa, I haven't felt this love," or "I've been waiting for this moment." Yeah, you raise a good point.
Well,
What's
if they would've if they would've done this, shifted their policy 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe that it might have worked. It might have worked, at least temporarily, it might have worked because I still am who I am, and I have a very strong constitution and a very strong will, raised my children to be that way as well. I was gonna do everything to make sure that they were shielded from, the organization, and it worked. I mean, they're their own men, so, yeah, but it was, yeah, that's why I reached out to you. I reached out to you because I knew somebody else is going to experience a similar
of course.
gaslighting. It's going to happen, and it really is a ploy. They really just wanted me to say, "I wanna come back," because even the overseer said, "Sherry, next time you come to Seattle, let's sit down and have a meeting, and let's talk." So, they're actively
Yeah.
working, they're trying a different tactic now.
Well, they're bleeding. They're bleeding, and I'm sorry, like you said, they just have to re-strategize, and this is sick, but it reminds me of it's connected. It reminds me of when we were witnesses, I know you'll remember this, Sherry. At the meetings, they'd be like, maybe someone's heart is not receptive to our message when we go knock on their door, but who knows? Maybe there's a death in the family. You know, maybe something tragic happens and then their heart will be receptive to the truth. And that was back then we were so like, uh, you know, when I say us, meaning just as
Yeah,
JWs, sitting at the Kingdom Hall listening to these meetings going, that's true. Maybe something bad will happen to these people. And then
yeah,
they might be
yeah,
receptive. Well, I think it's the same strategy, just like in a really sick, backwards way of like, trying to get you sucked back in using what I'm trying to say is a vulnerable time in your life, a vulnerable moment,
yes,
uh, you know,
exploiting my dad's
exploiting.
That's what it
exploiting
and
your
and I
body.
and
Yeah.
I knew that, at the nursing home, at the skilled facility place, they would gather around my dad, and I kinda took over. My attitude was when I would walk in, I wanted them to feel uncomfortable seeing me, not the other way around. I flipped the script. You're gonna feel uncomfortable in my presence, not the other way around. I'm gonna shun you. You're not gonna shun me. And that's what I did, and to their chagrin, they'd be like, "Well, I guess we'll be getting along now. Thank you for coming.
Right.
Means a
Well,
lot."
it's not
And
your
I was just
job. It's
really
not your job. They're not your responsibility to make them comfortable. So,
Yeah, but
um,
they wanted me to be receptive to their jokes, to their hugs. I guess I gave off a vibe to a lot of people, that I don't wanna be touched because I think they could just see the look on my face and my body language. "Okay, we're not gonna go and hug her then. Okay, she doesn't wanna be touched."
and
No,
also
no.
and also the organization doesn't have a you and I both know this, they don't have a history of practicing boundaries. Physical, emotional, that's a whole other conversation. So it's good that you erected those boundaries and made it clear what you're okay with and what you're not okay with. What message do you have for other ex-JWs who might find themselves in this position or dealing with this right now, where they have Jehovah's Witness family sort of re-entering their life and pulling these strategies or pulling these tactics?
Well, the first thing I will say is to examine your heart. I had to really examine my heart space and know that I could not come from a place of resentment and the dredging up of you did this to me, but you did that to me, but. I didn't want to do that because I knew that was just going to, pull me down into that abyss of pity and just, you know, relive everything all over again. So that was the first thing is how was I going to receive their love bombing and their kindness? How was I going to receive that? And I told myself resentment is not where I'm at. Neither is unconditional forgiveness either. You still need to be held accountable. So I think in the back of my mind, it was, I'm not going to resent you and hate you and bring up the past,
Yes.
but I am going to make it clear to you firmly through whatever means necessary, through how I respond to you or my body language, that you no longer get to hijack my emotions. You don't get to retell the story from your governing body, you know, perspective. You don't get to do that. So for me, it was I will accept that you're giving me sympathies. I will accept that you believe that shunning is wrong. Okay, you had to be your arm had to be twisted for it, but I'll accept that you've finally come to that place. I'm not going to take that away from you, but neither am I going to sacrifice all of the hard work that I have done emotionally and mentally. I'm not going to sacrifice that and say, "Oh, it's fine. Now we can just, pick up and do XYZ together and I'll go, study the Bible with you." No, things have changed. I can still love you. I can still smile at you. I'm not going to shun you like you shunned me, but neither am I going to give up who I am and everything I've built. I'm not going to do that. And that is where I would say to anybody who is feeling that pull, that now the family's softening. That's the word they use, by the way, softening. Um, I would just say that remember who you are. To thine own self be true. Remember who you are. Examine your heart space. Stand firm in your own sense of self. And if you've built it up, like I'm in my 60s, so I've had plenty of time to build this tower. If you've built it up, you certainly don't want to let anybody just come in and light a match and burn that all down. And then you'd have to start all over again. So if you allow yourself to, oh, okay, I will go to the Kingdom Hall. Okay, I'll go out have a study. Okay, a little bit. Then they're getting you in, and then before you know it, now everything that you built up, the strength that you had is now depleted. And so you have to be mindful of that. because, like I said, they're not examining their heart space, they're examining the watchtower. So
I like how
you
you say that, being mindful. Sherry, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm sure a lot of people are going through this that I just haven't heard of, but, people can leave their comments if they, have been through something similar, and you should be incredibly, incredibly proud of yourself. Coming out of something like this can, have a really strong negative impact on people for years, and, uh, you've stood in your power and your truth, and so anyways, you should be very proud of yourself. Thank you so much for coming on the channel. And yeah, if you guys appreciated Sherry's interview, please like, subscribe, share with somebody you think could benefit from it. And I will see you guys in the next interview. Thank you again, Sherry.
Thank you so much, appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.